Hello, how's it going, Fede?
Hey Seb, thank you so much for the invite. Really excited to get into the roadmap and talk about a lot of spicy stuff with you today.
Yeah. Well, I'm also interested in getting into some spicy stuff if you have some spice for me. So people in the chat were saying that they can't hear me very well, and I wonder if that's better. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay, Fede?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. So you were on 4 months ago. This was around, I guess it was around the merge, and at that point, you know, there had been the Nomad hack not so long before that, and I think for you guys it was a period where trying to get some footing also, on a number of things. It really feels like in the last 4 or 5 months, a lot of the vision, the Evmos vision and roadmap has kind of cleared up. At least that's my feeling. How would you say things have evolved since you were last on in, I guess it was October?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, we're definitely a more mature organization as a whole. Our team has grown significantly in size, and we moved together from a startup phase to something that we're like working like a Swiss clock. In the sense of like we're creating all these processes together, working together with engineering, marketing. You probably saw our new marketing related videos. Those are also from our new hire. We also hired people in product that can help us coordinate and do more user research, try to identify what are the user needs and how we incorporate that feedback directly into engineering or business development on our roadmap more in general. So yeah, I think as you mentioned, we are more mature in terms of an organization, and I believe that the roadmap that we published last week definitely reflects that.
Yeah, well, we'll get into the roadmap. The roadmap has a lot. I mean, it does have a sort of feature and technical improvement aspect to it, where you list some of the things that are expected to come in Evmos this year. But I think beyond that, it attempts to lay out a vision for where Evmos sits in the interchain. And this is something even for me that, when describing Evmos to people or talking about it with, investors or like builders in the space, it wasn't super clear to me always what Evmos's role would be in the broader interchain ecosystem. And I always saw it as kind of a I guess a hub, if you will, like, not to borrow the Cosmos hub's term,
So
but a sort of hub between the interchain and the EVM world. But we also have bridges, right, that can perform that function. So yeah, please like explain what is the vision that you guys are putting forth here in the manifesto, and where you see Evmos's role in the next 5 years or some timeline like that.
yeah, the Evmos manifesto basically, and the roadmap in general that we prepared for this week, basically outlines a future of more EVM chains, where the EVM has become the dominant stack for building smart contracts. There are more EVM developers than any other um, like stack like Cosmos, or even like building application specific blockchains in Cosmos or in other ecosystems. And so we see that in the future there will be like more needs for EVM specific chains, where like the EVM is catering to specific use cases according to developer needs or business needs. And so for this, we believe that in the future, it's the multi-chain strategy that our ecosystem as a whole has been implementing, where you have like applications being deployed on multiple chains, like multiple instances of the same application, is not going to be able to scale in the long run. And on the opposite side, we're proposing a future where you will be able to only deploy one instance of your smart contracts and fully interoperate via IBC bridges using the EVM and other interoperability mechanisms with other, not only smart contracts, but also chains in the ecosystem, and thus expanding your outreach as a developer to other ecosystems and other applications that you weren't able to leverage before for your business cases. And so the Evmos manifesto basically outlines like that vision, that in the long term we'll have like a fully interoperable applications using IBC, using EVM bridges, and that in order to get there, we need to work on certain engineering and business development components. And this is basically what the Evmos manifesto outlines through these, like Evmos and the applications of the future. You're muted.
Can you explain then what these applications of the future would look like? So there's this chart there where you've got like Aave on Ethereum and Cosmos and on Avalanche and all these other chains, and they're separate and not connected. And then there's the Evmos vision where Aave is on Evmos, and then that is, I guess, kind of leveraged to connect to all these other chains. What can you explain like how that plays out practically speaking?
Yeah, I see multiple examples of these applications of the future today in Cosmos, and how they're leveraging IBC and interoperability protocol that made Cosmos famous to kind of like create these applications of the future. Like one big question that I get a lot is like, how you build TVL natively on Evmos? But I said like, well, Osmosis TVL on Evmos TVL on Evmos on Osmosis is high, and we can like leverage Osmosis through, for example, Osmosis Outpost. That's a specific application of the future, like where you build composability with projects or chains or decentralized applications that aren't available in your individual chain, but you can connect to them and interoperate with them via IBC. Another concrete example could be, for example, like Sommelier that is building these kind of Ethereum coprocessor that's directly connecting to Ethereum via Gravity Bridge instance. And so by leveraging interoperability, users and developers can access liquidity sources, applications, smart contracts, chains in general that weren't able to be reached before. And so these are like two particular examples of applications of the future. And when we take that into the decentralized application level and smart contract level, then we're talking about, okay, by definition, all these DeFi applications work as money Legos on Ethereum. What happens when you have Legos that you need for your application, but they're not available on your chain? What can you do if you don't have like an Oracle service, for example? How can you leverage oracles that are available on other EVM chains? And for that, we believe that in the future, through interoperability, you will be able to access these like applications via IBC, for example, and only use one single instance.
Okay, there's still some things that are like a bit unclear to me here. So can you explain, so practically speaking, let's use this Aave example. Where, currently Aave is deployed on mainnet Ethereum. They have contracts on other chains. They have some sort of a bridging mechanism that allows liquidity to move between the Ethereum chain and those other sort of layer 2s where Aave is deployed, also layer 1s. If fast forward into a future where your vision is fully deployed, what would be different? Like, what would that tangibly look like?
Yeah, like we expect that in the future, as a developer, instead of like choosing which application to, or like which EVM chain to develop your own DeFi application, you'll have like one alternative, which will be like developing on Evmos or another Evmos SDK chain and launching your instance there, deploying your smart contract there, and thus being accessible by the entire ecosystem. In this case, we're talking about Aave, and then if you deploy that Aave instance to Evmos, then it will be accessible not only by smart contracts that are available on Evmos, but they will also be available by smart contracts and DeFi apps available on other EVM compatible chains. Aave will be accessible by smart contracts from like Cosmos Wasm run compatible chains, and they will also be accessible. Aave will also be accessible by non-EVM or non-smart contracts chains, like for example Cosmos Hub at this moment, or Sommelier is another example of an application that leverages smart contracts. In this case, like Aave on Ethereum, but through interoperability, they can create like all these use cases as an application-specific blockchain. And so in the future, you will only have one instance that can access all the entire ecosystem of application chains, no matter which VM you're using, and it will be like fully accessible by everyone.
Okay, I think it's starting to make sense to me. So, what it sounds like is it sounds a little bit of like the vision of the Cosmos SDK and the interoperability benefits that you get from building with the Cosmos SDK, but extended to the EVM. And what makes that possible is the fact that Evmos, powered by Evmos SDK, aka Ethermint, allows IBC like interoperability between with an
Like
EVM.
all the EVMs, all the smart contracts within the EVM, all the smart contracts within Cosmos Wasm chains, and also non-smart contract chains, like for example, in this case, I just named Sommelier,
like Cosmos Hub.
Cosmos Hub.
So I think I understand the Cosmos side, and I think most of the listeners will kind of get how Evmos works with interoperability between Evmos and Cosmos Wasm contracts and any IBC chain works. The part that's a little bit fuzzy for me is when you say, an EVM SDK deployment, Evmos SDK deployment would be interoperable with any smart contract on like a non Evmos SDK chain. So like, I don't know, you've got a contract over on Gnosis chain. What makes that interoperability possible? Because in my current sort of mental framework, you have to have some kind of a bridge there, or like a ZK bridge that allows these chains to verify their state or something like that doesn't quite exist yet. But yeah.
So I think like in the future there will be like, and this is more like a prediction in terms of like how the ecosystem, like the Cosmos ecosystem, is evolving over time, is that IBC is going to be deployed on non-Cosmos chains as well. Like for the ones that have like fast instant finality and have BFT consensus, it will be like the preferred way of interoperating with other chains within like their ecosystem, and also interoperate with the chains in the ecosystem. And there will be adapters as well to other ecosystems, like for example, I think what's the name, Composable is working on an adapter for IBC with the Polkadot ecosystem. So there'll be like single chains that will serve as like the point of entry to those ecosystems, so that we have like clusters of interoperability implementing different standards of interoperability. And we believe Evmos is going to become this point of entry for the entire EVM ecosystem, based on our technology and our and our developer experience as well.
Okay, so what you're saying is that like currently but what you're saying is that this EVM to EVM interoperability
would be possible because of IBC.
Right. It's not currently possible, but would be possible in the future that
Yeah,
you
so this level of composability will be enabled due to IBC, but I think like smart contract based bridges on the EVM side, and they're also transitioning slowly to interoperability that is not only like token transfers, but also more like general like data calls,
cross-chain messaging.
cross-chain messaging. I think like Chainlink is also building their own interoperability. They're also building their interoperability standard. I know that Axelar is working towards this goal of like serving this general message passing between EVM chains at a more general level, not only like token transfers. So there will be multiple ways or multiple standards that Evmos application developers could use to leverage this interoperability, not only within the Evmos and the Cosmos ecosystem, but also with the EVM, the Polkadot ecosystem through these adapters. Yeah.
And with the Evmos EVM, is the idea here, because I think my mental model is very much attached to the Cosmos SDK model, where the Cosmos SDK is meant to be able to launch Tendermint, BFT blockchains with different modules that allow you to do things that most blockchains would do. Is the idea with the Evmos SDK to also be this way to launch application-specific chains? So if I'm thinking of launching my own chain, I want to launch like a DeFi platform, I can say, I want to build it with the Cosmos SDK, or I want to build it with the Evmos SDK because I think that my community will be more.
There's like a specific difference in that regard, and yes, you're right. Well, Evmos allows you to build your own application-specific logic using like Cosmos SDK modules. The Evmos SDK will allow protocol developers to launch their EVM-specific chains through this concept of EVM extensions, custom precompiles, custom opcodes. And so like taking the EVM itself, like which was traditionally maintained by Go Ethereum and the entire like Ethereum ecosystem, but taking it to a more modular general level where you can change like all these components internally so that you can have an EVM that is only allowing a chain to launch rollups on top. So you become the settlement layer for layer 2 rollups, which is something that we outline on our Cevmos blog post, where you can have like an EVM that is specifically working for NFTs, and you won't support any ERC20s, you won't support any other type of contracts other than the ones that support like NFTs, for example. And so you can define and customize this EVM based on your specific needs here. And that's kind of like the goal of the SDK, a way to create your own EVM specific chains, your own EVM extensions, and of course, allowing developers and projects to leverage our technical expertise that we built at Evmos to launch EVMs.
So tell me a little bit more about this Cevmos thing, because I was talking to Ismail about it and like trying to figure out what is the use case that it serves. And so for listeners, Cevmos is this Celestia Evmos partnership where data availability and consensus is provided by Celestia. The settlement layer is provided by Evmos. And then the execution layer would be some kind of ZK rollup or optimistic rollup. How does that compare to, say, when making it, when a developer is faced with the design choice or the architecture choice of building this infrastructure, why would they use this particular configuration over using Fuel or using Ethereum on top of it on Celestia or something?
So what Evmos SDK will allow, and I was using Cevmos as a particular example of an specific like EVM specific chains targeted to layer 2 rollups that will be specialized and only allow these configuration or these like extensions, so to say. And these in the end is way more modular. It's way easier. It has all the necessary infrastructure like RPCs, IVC, EVM extensions that we will develop internally as a team. It will have like components like the like block explorer and basic infrastructure necessary to kickstart your project. And so through this like vision that we outlined initially of like cross chain that you will only be able to deploy once, you won't need to build these entire DeFi Legos on your chain, but you will be able to access them on other EVM chains in the Cosmos ecosystem and in the EVM ecosystem, like Evmos, for example. You'll be able to use this infrastructure directly via IVC. So you can like quickly bootstrap your EVM chain using the Evmos SDK, and through interoperability, get access to these money Legos that are so necessary for these developers to build new use cases.
Okay, and so from that perspective, Cevmos is
an example. Like I was in this particular case, I was naming Cevmos as an example of like how modular these Evmos SDK will be. That will be not only an EVM for general purpose, but for specific purposes, built in a modular way where you would be able to define all these extensions, all the configurations for the SDK, and all the rules that you would want for these EVM to fully work, I guess.
Okay, so but you see it's like the Cevmos stack. You see it as more as something that would be
implemented on top of the Evmos SDK.
Right, but what I mean is, will there be kind of a Cevmos settlement layer, like one place where people can build rollups, or do you think that Cevmos will have multiple instances and multiple deployments on top of Celestia because of, I don't know, like
I think
industry use cases? Or
I think there will be multiple rollups with multiple settlement layers, and Cevmos will be, I guess, one of the main EVM settlement layers on top of Celestia.
Okay,
but I think it's too early to tell. It's like a project that is like hasn't been scoped out, and there's like a lot of question marks there. But it's kind of like in order to get to Cevmos, we need to work on the modularity of the EVM. First, and that's the first step that we're taking as an organization.
So I guess my other question, and this kind of is something I've been thinking a lot about lately, is the longevity of the EVM, and I think about it in more 10 to 20 year time horizons. So if we look at the history of computing, there have been programming languages or programming environments that have come and gone. So, if you talk to people our parents' age, they'll probably tell you that they were coding, using Cobalt and Fortran and all these things. And then, in the 90s, that was more like C and C++. And then later, like web development technologies emerged. And every time we had improvements in those development environments and the tooling and also in the security and all these things. Now, the EVM is known for having, a number of design and architecture issues with it that cause it to be insecure and difficult to, where the development environment and tooling is, has to do a lot of the work in terms of making sure contracts are sort of secure, and so there have been improvements there in the form of like Cosmos, for example, that is secure by design, where it's written in Rust, it's written in this strongly typed language that eliminates a lot of those issues. And when you think about blockchains in a more long term, like 10, 15 year time horizon, Do you think that the EVM will still have stuck around by then, or do you think it would have been phased out by newer, more modern, more secure, and just better development environments?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think in the future, and I'll tell you how I feel from a personal experience with the EVM. That in the future, the EVM will become another product. I think that Ethereum is keeping a lot of things as is because of backwards compatibility. But at Evmos, we see the EVM as a product that can definitely be improved. And so we see ideas like implementing EWASM as a concrete example of how we can leverage these newer technologies on a stack that is like already there with all the tools necessary for developers to build all these smart contracts and decentralized applications.
I mean,
Uh,
EWASM is mostly a dead project, is it not?
yeah, but for example, implementing the EVM directly on Cosmos is something that would have the qualities of a more modular stack, like using Cosmos, while at the same time retaining the developer experience that the EVM currently has with all the developer toolings and having it be fully EVM compatible also for the wallet, so there won't be any migration, so like performance will be improved. And so yeah, that's how we see at Evmos like the EVM as a product, where like there's like the EVM now, and the EVM of the future will evolve into a more robust product as a whole. And at Evmos, we plan to make such improvements. And we are starting by doing the Evmos SDK, creating the best EVM framework out there, and then EVM extensions as a first mechanism for developers to define their additions to the EVM, which wasn't possible before.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's like, I don't know. It's not super clear to me what the long term prospects are for any of this stuff, because I mean we're still super early. I mean, in terms of users, I think there are as many people using crypto now as there were people on the internet in like '98, right? So
Right.
you know it bears reminding just how early things are, and I think like technologies also will probably, some technologies will evolve, others will maybe die out, and
Right.
like I think the EVM has a lot of network effect and a lot of
It does.
yeah,
It'll be the
it has
JavaScript
massive
of
network effect.
crypto in some way, where there are definitely more new and new stacks or new frameworks that have better performance and better semantics in general.
Mm.
But
But that doesn't mean they'll get adopted. Like there's also
exactly.
examples. There's also examples in history of things that were better and were I think very much expected to outperform some of the other stuff, but the other stuff, the older, less performance stuff stuck around, until something else came around. I mean,
Yeah.
like just look at how long Java stuck around in big organizations, and
Yeah.
there's still a lot of Java in big organizations and Java VM.
Exactly. And PHP and other langages that we
Yeah,
good thing that they're very,
very
like, no one
sticky.
is using them. Like the positions for those developers are highly demanded.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the case of PHP, I think what that shows is, I mean, I don't know to what extent. I mean, from my viewpoint, it seems like PHP is basically maintained now to
Legacy
maintain
legacy
WordPress.
infrastructure, yeah.
Well, I mean, to maintain WordPress, because like tons of websites are still built with WordPress,
Exactly.
and people still build WordPress sites all the time. It's probably like the biggest user of PHP, and I think to some extent that's also perhaps what we will see in blockchain, where some languages, execution environments, and even chains will continue to exist to maintain a specialized use case. I think it's likely to happen also with and I've talked about this with other people as well, is some application specific chains, or sorry, some smart general purpose smart contract chains that exist today probably at some point will specialize to their biggest use case or like their biggest application.
But it tells you a lot that a lot of chains nowadays are choosing the EVM as their preferred option for building a smart contract compatible blockchain, because of these like developer ecosystem, developer tooling, developer kind of like network effects, as you were saying. And Ethermint, the library that we own and maintain, has been one of the most successful EVM frameworks at the moment. And the next phase for that is building the Evmos SDK, where you have like a EVM that is more performant, is fully interoperable, has more customizability. You can leverage extension, custom precompiles, and like everything that you want for your custom EVM, and in a way itself improve the EVM with these additions that are customizable, but also the lower level stack of the EVM can also be improved in the sense of if you think of it as a product.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to another point I wanted to discuss, which is the use of Ethermint by other projects, and specifically, there's been like a lot of noise in the last couple of days and maybe weeks around Canto having used Ethermint, and I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to like all this drama. But Canto was a project that I was looking at last summer and thought it was interesting. It was like talking to the team, and I thought like, okay, this is a cool cool chain that tries to solve something slightly different. What are your thoughts about the use of Ethermint by other projects, leveraging open source technology that was built and funded by someone else to then go and build a competing product? It seems like it's a topic that a lot of people are discussing now.
Yeah, it's very, I guess it's a trending topic, and also in the sense that public goods being maintained by teams is also something that impacts not only our team, but also teams like Confio, who after some time, and there might be running out of cash, and Confio, for the ones that don't know, is the team behind Cosmos, and that is widely used in the Cosmos ecosystem. And so it falls under like a strategy of the commons, where like you have teams that are maintaining this critical infrastructure, but and a lot of teams are using it, but no one wants to like chip in or like contribute any sort of resources. And by resources, I don't only mean like financial resources, but also like engineers or like co-marketing or partnerships, or however you want to like go about it. But and then that brings the question of like, okay, like whose responsibility is to maintain this? And for our case, like we built this public good, which is the Ethermint library, as like the main framework for building EVM chains on the Cosmos ecosystem, that we in some way resuscitated after no one taking proper care of it. And so we took it to production level. We dramatically improved the performance, its usability, etc. And so it became very clear that it was super easy to build new EVM compatible chains. Now, to your question of like this competition on like drama behind like Canto being like an Evmos fork, and like how is the Evmos community reacting to Canto's success? And I think it's like in some degree a validation that our technology is in the right path, and that there's clear demand for this technology. I personally believe that Ethermint has been our most successful product so far. It hasn't been Evmos, but it has been Ethermint, which is widely used. If you think about like all the chains that are using Ethermint right now. It's like Chronos, Kava, Canto, and like many other ones that are building EVM specific chains. And so the right way to think about it is like, okay, how do you align these projects that are using this critical infrastructure that is maintained by Evmos, and how does Evmos, the Evmos community benefit from these other teams using these critical infrastructure that we've developed and maintained as well? It's not only that these teams don't necessarily contribute the proper amount of resources, but it's also the fact that you're saving them a ton of time, ton of engineering time, of things that they don't even need to take care of. And so they spend the opportunity cost of spending that amount of man hours in building this critical infrastructure. They can use it and like build community or build like partnerships or do other business related activities. And so, yeah, I mean, the main question from our community has been like, okay, how do you make this not a zero-sum game, but a positive sum game where like we as a community, as Evmos community, we're also in some way benefited from the success of Canto and from the success of other chains. It's like I have a fun anecdote. When the FIFA World Cup was being displayed last year, my mom kind of reached out to me. It's like, oh, is that Chronos, like the chain that is
That's right. Yeah.
that software that is like on the banner of the World Cup final? It's like, yeah, they're using our software. But like the thing is like, okay, like how do we go about it? And it was like, yeah, like, so this reflects this. It's kind of like a way for us to kind of like, the Evmos SDK is a way for us to kind of like work on this alignment between all the different chains that are using our critical infrastructure that we develop, and for the Evmos community to directly benefit from the success of other chains that are using this infrastructure.
So let's talk about licensing then, because I think this is a topic that also has come up recently. What do you see as the right licensing model such that anybody can use the software that you're building, because that is the ethos of open source, and that's the way it should be, and anybody can remix that software, build something else with it, improve upon it, etc., while still generating revenue for that software that you're building? And I think Confio is probably asking themselves that same question right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's a subtle but very significant difference between open source and also free to use. They're different in a way. So like the purpose of open source is not only for using the code for free and allow forks and allow copies of the same software, but also for auditability purposes, so that people that know that there's like a blockchain know that the code is actually not removing any transactions or minting tokens for one specific address, whatever. So there's like that important point, and the other one is like free to use software. And I think that the licensing model, like when we implemented Ethermint, we took the same license as Core Ethereum, which if you use Ethermint, you need to state that you're using, there's like attribution, and then there's like any code changes need to be upstream or need to be informed to the maintainer. And I guess like our error there was like assuming that all the chains that were going to use Ethermint were in some way going to contribute in one way or another to the further development of Ethermint, but it wasn't the case, as we saw and from experience, except some minor cases, like for example, the guys from Crypto.org that are working on Chronos. And it's been a pleasure working with them, for example. And the Evmos SDK, in some way, kind of like the way we're thinking about it is having the code be free to use. But if you're thinking of like adding this customizability or adding these additional components on top, you will need to align in some way or another with the Evmos community. And by aligning, it doesn't mean like, for example, paying us, the core team, but aligning in some way with the Evmos holders. For example, like none of the teams that have used the software have, for example, made an airdrop to token holders, as far as I remember, at least, or come up with a different proposal, at least for aligning these two communities that may have like similar components, but like with some like one or two differentiating factors. So I think like that alignment of communities to prevent this zero-sum game is really important. I really believe that the code should be open source for these auditability purposes that I just mentioned. And yeah, I think the way to move forward and the way to prevent events like we're seeing right now with Confio, where they're running out of money because of no one wants to pay for this critical infrastructure. I mean,
that's insane to me. Like
the
fact that Confio
as a ecosystem overall.
Yeah, the fact that Confio has to take these measures and sort of make a lot of noise around the fact that they're no longer funding any public goods and no longer funding their own software at the level of integration within Cosmos, and also the value that has been created for the Cosmos ecosystem by Cosmos. I feel like is insane. It's insane that they have not been able to get funding from like at least the ICF.
There's a question of like who should be funding these initiatives, and I think a lot of these initiatives come from like either the Cosmos Hub community through like a grant or a community pool, like was the initial case of Cosmos and also like Ethermint in our case, and the way for these community, the way that we try to align with the Cosmos Hub was like through the airdrop and through like collaborating directly, like the airdrop directly for core contributors and for the Evmos stakers and LP as we outline in our airdrop rules. And but going forward, the question is like who should be paying for this? And I think like there needs to be some way to align these communities together so that we prevent this case.
Yeah. I guess the question that's on everyone's mind, or at least on this viewer's mind, is how will the Evmos SDK benefit Evmos holders? And I think my question there would be like, how would this licensing and this fee model that you guys are thinking about benefit Evmos holders? Is the idea here to have some value flow back to Evmos holders in addition to funding the software?
Yeah, so to be fair, they're like internally at the team, we're still thinking different ways of aligning. But yeah, the core principle of this is like the community should benefit directly from the success of other EVM chains. And to that question is like, one, will the Evmos SDK benefit Evmos holders? The answer is yes. How is like still up in the air. But for example, the airdrops could be one potential idea, like enforcing this license through airdrop. Like if you launch a new production chain using our software, you need to like airdrop some tokens. But that's an idea that it's still up in the air and still needs to be discussed and etc. And other ideas are contributing resources. There are teams that are already contributing to the development of Ethermint and in general the EVM, etc., participating in the discussions, fixing bugs or reviewing PRs, whatever. And so I don't think the level of alignment, I mean, because they are already contributing, I don't think that they should be paying the price for the ones that are currently not aligning. So in that sense, there could be some like tiering system, like or for these like Evmos SDK. As I said, like the how is still up in the air, but the if, like, will Evmos benefit Evmos? Will the SDK benefit Evmos holder? The answer is yes.
Well, that's good to hear because as an Evmos holder, I think we've all kind of felt the pain of the price having been so affected in the last couple of months, and definitely love to see the would love to see the entire ecosystem sort of come back up again, and this is definitely part of that. I think that I mean, like, token prices aside, being able to sorry.
No, yeah, sorry. We're a community of builders, and we'll keep building like this core infrastructure that is powering Evmos and other EVM chains on Cosmos. And so we're open to suggestions from the community. We're constantly listening to the community in our community calls, and I believe that we have one today, and our governance calls, and we're very active on Twitter and Discord and Telegram. So you can reach out to us or to the moderators if you have any particular feedback or suggestions of how we should go about this, like Evmos SDK. So happy to hear any feedback on that regard as well.
Yeah, well, I was going to follow up here on the roadmap, but since you brought up governance, I'll first ask you about this. So, what the Evmos governance, and I think more generally Evmos community discussions around governance has been really interesting to watch, and like it's very vibrant, and there's a really broad community of people that are participating in these discussions. I sometimes sit in on some of these governance calls or the Twitter spaces that you're doing, and there's a lot of really interesting discussions. There's also been some like messy stuff lately. Don't want to get into like the details there. People can go look that up. But what have you learned, from since Evmos was launched and having to reason about community governance and having to satisfy the expectations of lots of different people? What have you learned through this process?
Yeah, so Evmos is one of the most active communities on Commonwealth, which is this platform for blockchains that have like some form of governance, either through a token or like on our case, like you can create different type of proposals. Yeah. And it's been very vibrant in the sense that there's a lot of holders, not only validators, that are actively voting and expressing their opinion and participating in the discussion on these calls. And so like that has been a huge validation for not only our community team, but also to like the entire community. So like mad props to them for fostering such a like interest in our governance overall. That being said, there's like certainly a lot of processes that had to be implemented as some sort of like guidelines to prevent different types of behavior that may be a little bit conflictive at times. But overall, like the community is very receptive. It's very like we have chats with validators where they express their opinion and we can debate ideas. And so in that regard, it's like very positive. A lot of people are very opinionated, I must say, but I guess it's part of governance. It happens in real life with politics. And so I wouldn't expect it to be different and in a decentralized way on blockchains.
Yeah, it is extremely opinionated sometimes, and sometimes a bit hard to follow. But yeah, it's certainly
Exactly.
exciting. Yeah, I want to talk about the roadmap a little bit because there's a lot of really cool stuff here. I mean, there's a lot on this roadmap, so I'll show it here on the screen. Um, but what are the things that you're most? Well, I'll tell you what I'm most excited about here. So I think the liquid staking, of course, is super interesting. Interchain accounts, that just generally in Cosmos, I think is something that I'm
Such an
very bullish on.
explored design territory there,
Sorry.
especially it's such an unexplored territory. Interchain
Yeah.
accounts with smart contracts, account abstraction as well, together with interchain accounts, it's such an explored territory, and I think we're
So maybe let's describe interchain, account extraction, because I think most people in the audience maybe are not familiar with. It's a term that I only became familiar with
Ethereum.
recently.
Yeah.
It's something that Ethereum chains are implementing. Gnosis chain is implementing it. Actually, when Federica was on the podcast recently, she talked about it. But essentially, it is making every account a smart contract, right? So that you can have permissions, recovery, all sorts of things. Can you dive a bit deeper here into what that enables?
Yeah, so Evmos itself already implements this concept of like accounts, like a general purpose account, like we call it like an Ethereum based, like an Ethereum account where it can either be a smart contract or it can either like be an externally owned account on EOA. So account abstraction means like paired with interchain accounts means you will be able as a user or as a smart contract be able to manage your accounts in the interchain, and by accounts taking this concept of account abstraction means that you will be able to manage externally owned accounts like individual user accounts or other smart contracts.
Yeah.
Which will allow you to have this concept of like going back to the original like um, discussion that we had about multi-chain, like where you have like multiple instances of the same smart contract, or that versus like cross-chain where you have like a single instance that now is available in the entire ecosystem via IBC and interoperability. This will allow these smart contracts to have their accounts controlling certain behavior on the smart contracts via interchain accounts. And so this will open like new possibilities for these smart contracts, again, enabling like true composability, etc., and true interchain composability.
Yeah, it's a really neat concept. Like, I think if the best way to uh, the best way to sort of see how this is implemented is through something like Argent, which is an Ethereum wallet that does social
Exactly.
recovery and that implements the account as a smart contract. Account abstraction generalizes this concept at the chain level and makes it. What's really cool about this is that it essentially turns the account into an asset. So you could have an account. That account could be owned, say, by like one key or a set of keys in a multi-sig fashion, and that entire account could then be transferred over to another set of keys controlled by another set of keys entirely without having to move the assets in it. So the use cases for that are just like incredible. So for instance, I mean, the most basic use case is if you have a company or any sort of organization that holds
Yeah.
crypto, and you have to set up a wallet and you have to set up keys and whatever. You want to sell that company.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, that like
Yeah.
transferring delegations, transferring not only
Right. Like
funds.
you'd have to kind of unwind all of that, move it to another account because the people, the new organization, the new management would have access to those keys. With this, you can just kind of disconnect those permissions and then reconnect new permissions for someone else. I think the applications for this are just massive. You can also sell entire portfolios say you have like a portfolio of
Exactly.
NFTs and those things are staked, and like there's all this kind of stuff that's winded in there. You can just sell that entire account to
Exactly.
someone
So,
else.
like by leveraging account abstraction together with interchain accounts, I think Evmos will be uniquely positioned not only as an EVM chain, but as a chain in general in this like interchain ecosystem that will enable like new use cases for these developers.
So talk a little bit about the EVM extensions. What are those? That's a new concept, I think, for most
Yeah.
people.
So I talked a little bit about this in Cosmoverse last year in Colombia. It was in Spanish, so I didn't like dive into like the specific concept of stateful precompiles, but the EVM extensions basically will allow, together with the Evmos SDK, will allow developers to create new use cases to connect directly with Cosmos module or Cosmos specific logic.
Yeah.
And for example, our first EVM extension that we will launch is the staking precompile and the ICS20 like interchain transfers. So this will allow smart contracts to be able to stake, and so will enable a new generation of liquid staking derivatives. Like for example, Lido could come and deploy their liquid staking derivative directly on Evmos by leveraging this EVM staking extension. At the same time, the main problem that we see right now with EVM bridges is they're not able to reach other chains in the Cosmos ecosystem because the EVM bridges are not IBC enabled. And so, for example, a bridge like Seller could use this ICS20 EVM extension to directly route the tokens to Osmosis or to Cosmos Hub, etc., and automatically convert them to the IBC format. So this will enable like smart contracts to become IBC dApps in some way as well. So not only access to Cosmos components, but also allow them to build IBC dApps, which was something that wasn't possible before due to the constraints that you had to build your own IBC application module on your own chain. But now applications can also participate in this development of IBC enabled applications.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, there's like so much potential here. I think to you know, I think building in a lot
We're
of the
enabling
core
IBC.
functionality on the chain.
We're enabling IBC to a generation of developers that know Solidity but haven't been exposed to IBC yet. So imagine
Yeah.
the potential that you have having all the people that build the most successful DeFi apps on Ethereum and NFT dApps, etc., to build their own IBC-enabled dApps on Evmos using EVM extensions. And in the future, it will also be available on the Evmos SDK, again, for these projects that align directly with Evmos holders.
Super cool. And then what's this simple agreement for funding upload?
Yeah, so Safu is a model, like a security model for, like a security agreement for white hat hackers. So when we talk about security vulnerabilities, there are like two classification. So one is like an active vulnerability, which is what happened with Nomad, when you had like these everyone rushing to get some tokens, and you have like multiple hackers. Some of them are white hat, some of them are malicious hackers, and so there's like a lot of legal uncertainty, lack of clarity from the team, and so having these like SAFU agreements that you can also access today in our security section on our repository and our documentation. You can basically connect directly with these with these applications.
Okay. What else in the roadmap are you particularly excited about?
Your video is cut, by the way.
Oh, can you
Yeah,
still hear me?
yeah, I can hear you, but there's
Okay.
no signal.
Well, this is a new setup, so yeah, of course, there's going to be some issues with it. So,
Yeah.
good thing I've got a backup webcam. But yeah, what else are you particularly interested in, or like very excited about?
So I think like something that has been overlooked in the because I talked to I've given already 2 interviews about this, about the roadmap on in general our manifesto is the Evmos dApp store, which is like going to be a new mechanism for users to interact with the applications on Evmos, and they'll be able to we'll have created content, we'll have like a mechanism for them for the leaderboards of these different decentralized applications. You'll be able to see like, okay, if you connect your wallet and you've used like certain smart contracts on Evmos, we can also recommend you, and of course if you opt into the suggestions, you'll be able to like we will be able to provide you some recommendations of other applications that you should be trying, or like suggested apps. You will be able to pin and review applications, see like the descriptions available. Developers will be able to publish their applications, and so it's a lot to digest, but I think it will be powerful for the overall user experience of Evmos.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for coming on again. You're officially the guest that has been on the Interrupt the most. So I think this is your
Thank you,
third
Seth.
time. But yeah, looking forward to seeing this roadmap play out, and excited to see the future of Evmos as I'm going to call it a cross-chain hub between the internet chain and the EVM. That's the way I'm going to describe it from now on.
Yeah, I'm definitely really excited for what's to come, and thank you everyone from the community for listening in and always supporting us. Yeah, we are a chain that has less than a year, where we build like most of the critical infrastructure for this to work, and now 2023 is going to be the year that we'll be launching like our real functionalities. We'll be launching these like vision and enabling this vision of like true interoperable smart contracts.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Well, you may have noticed that this episode is on a Tuesday, where typically I do episodes on Thursday. That's because there's so much stuff going on in the space that I think I'm constrained, or like sort of obliged now to do 2 episodes a week. So I'm not holding myself to this schedule when there's going to be some extra things that I really want to get out there as quickly as possible. I might do an extra episode on Tuesday. Regular episodes will be on Thursdays, but this seems so important that I couldn't wait until whenever in March when I have some time to do it. So yeah, and thank you. Thanks for tuning in. And if you enjoy this content, please consider staking with Interop. We're live on Evmos and also on Quicksilver. See you next week, or see you on Thursday. See you next time.